Humans, for the most part, don't have a clue. They don't want one or need one either. They're happy. They think they have a good bead on things.
But why the big secret? People are smart. They can handle it.
The person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
Welcome to episode 19 of the Left Shew Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Shew. My partners Jeremy and Michael will be hosting their own shows soon, so please keep an eye out for those. Left Shew Politics Podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Libsyn, and anywhere great podcasts can be found. Please go over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Facebook and, of course, on Twitter at Left Shew Politic. With me today is returning guest from the San Francisco Film Critics Circle, my friend Zaki Hasan. Zaki.
Hi.
Man, you were on our first show, sir, way back in September of 2016.
And yet you've kept going.
And we have kept going.
I didn't jinx you. I didn't tie your feet together at the starting line.
Well, you always make us better, sir. That's why we've had you back on several times. And we also do some comic book oriented podcast as well, pop culture stuff. So it's always fun to talk to you, man.
Thank you, sir.
And speaking of that, another friend of mine that I've done the aforementioned pop culture type of podcast with, but never anything political. So our first time guest on this show, he's a writer for movies.com. He's a political science graduate and a local campaign opposition researcher, Mr. Chris Clow. Chris, what's up, buddy?
Hey, not much, man. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
You know, we've been talking for, I want to say almost literally like years, at least a year or two, about you coming on this show. I'm excited to have you. So thanks so much, man.
Oh, much obliged.
I'm sorry. It's Chris, is it?
Yes, I think is it Zaki? Have we
close.
spoken something like that?
Yeah. So you two guys have like a Star Trek show, right?
We do.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah. Discovery Debrief. It's a fun show. We got my wife is on it along with a friend of ours named Cicero Holmes, and we talk about an optimistic future, which is quite the contrast to the present that we currently live in.
It is science fiction right now. Emphasis on fiction.
It is the antithesis of the world we live in. And, you know, on that note, you know, it's been a while since we've done a Left Shew show, and there's several reasons why. We all have normal lives and we've been busy, but we want to get these going again. But I can't lie, guys. It's hard to do a show right now in this administration. I don't know how journalists, like actual journalists, keep up. Well, the journalists that are left, there's 5 left on the planet, I guess, these days. But how they keep, or, you know, anybody keeps up with this administration, it is a colossal, perpetual shit show. And I would much rather be talking about something policy oriented anyway. It's far more interesting. And I know that you guys can definitely contribute to basically any topic. And I feel like I'm wasting talent here. But after this unprecedented week, these bombshells, I can't not discuss this. And just this Cohen Manafort mess that's transpired over the last 48 hours, and what it could possibly mean for this administration in terms of the legal ramifications, the political backlash, you know, assuming there is any, that remains to be seen. But so it's going to be a loaded initial question. And Chris, since this is your first time on the show, I'm going to have you go first. What were your initial thoughts when, you know, because basically the Paul Manafort thing and then the Michael Cohen, those things happen within an hour of one another?
It seemed that way.
Like when the verdict went down for Manafort and then the plea bargain thing for Cohen was, I mean, as far as the breaking news went, it was literally within 2 hours of each other. And this is serious stuff. So just what was your initial thoughts? Well, the last 48 hours.
It's hard to parse things generally because of what you said. Things fly so fast and so furiously that it's hard to keep track sometimes because you're constantly bombarded with all of this news that surrounds potential corruption or questions of collusion or campaign finance violations. That was also a big one this week, right? Uh,
And on that note, I don't mean to interrupt you. I want you to keep going. But for our listeners, if you're out there and you don't know exactly what we're talking about, let me give just a brief summary so you know what Chris is talking about.
Yes,
we're gonna pick back up with Chris. So Paul Manafort is Trump's former campaign chairman. Okay, he was found guilty of tax evasion and bank fraud by a jury in Virginia. Now we're talking, I think there were 15 charges, and 8 of them he was convicted on. Okay, and the rest are more or less a hung jury. It's probably going to be, we'll deal with that
because of one person, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. But regardless, 8. This is serious, okay? Again, this is Trump's former campaign chairman, all right? Minutes later in New York, it was Trump's longtime former lawyer and fixer, whatever you want to call him, Michael Cohen, pleading guilty to tax evasion, falsifying submissions to a bank, and campaign finance violations. Okay, so that's the recap. So, Chris, I'm sorry, pick up where you left off, sir.
No, it's fine. I always appreciate that. But it's because everything came at such a quick pace, you kind of have to try and take a step back and parse exactly what this could mean for the future going forward. I mean, the legal difficulties that surround this administration, it kind of boggles the mind how comparisons can come up from conservatives for the Obama administration, because we never had to endure anything even remotely close to the amount of legal crap that is in the orbit of this White House. So my initial thoughts are basically, well, okay, how are they going to slink out of this one? Because as much as I hate to admit it, the president has been effective at sort of circumventing what we would expect to be typical consequences for this kind of behavior. And he is very good at obfuscating what's happening by throwing other bones to the media who will pick up on things and divert attention away. I mean, how quickly did things divert from the tapes that Omarosa Manigault Newman threw into the sort of media wildfire, and then you had the president, the next day, introduce some new crazy policy position that totally diverted the media's attention away from it. So this is one of those scenarios where it seems like it's going to have to play out a little bit more in the fullness of time as far as what the overall implications are going to be. But honestly, over the course of the entire special counsel investigation and now throwing Cohen into the mix, this is the first time, honestly, where I'm starting to feel like maybe the chips are starting to fall. Maybe. But I'm still being cautious about where I allow my mind to go when it comes to projecting the future, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and I think you're smart and wise to do that. And what I mean by this is I have a lot of friends. They're the resist movement. They're the never Trumpers on the GOP side, and they're smart people. They're good people, but they're already just, he's going to get impeached or he's getting arrested. I'm like, You know what? I think we should work with the assumption that he's going to run again and get reelected. Because if we get complacent and we think this way, it can manifest. It can. We're not inspiring people to register to vote. We're not telling them to get out and fight. This thing is long but over, and he could survive this, and he very well might. Zaki, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of break it down with you. So Chris gave a great answer there. I'm curious, as far as the Paul Manafort thing goes, I was discussing it with a friend the other day, and he was like, I don't think that's as consequential as the Michael Cohen thing, and it may very well not be. But
I disagree with that.
Well, great. Okay, good. And why don't you just tell me why you disagree with that, and that'll save me the time of asking the next question anyway.
Well, I mean, let's look at the fact that he has. Giuliani said this, that Trump was talking to his lawyers about how soon can he pardon Paul Manafort. He was asking the question, can I pardon him before the trial is even over? Can I you know what I mean? And to me, all that says is he has a lot of shit in his head that Trump would rather stay there. That's what it comes down to. Obviously, Trump knows the political risk involved in pardoning Manafort, and he's making the calculation that it's worth it because the alternative being whatever he knows getting out there is not worth it, right? So I think the problem really is. It's this weird thing we're seeing in the media where it's like everyone's dancing around the fact that Trump is clearly guilty. We don't know what he is guilty of, but everything he says and does is the mien and manner of a guilty man. Right?
Literally. I mean,
yeah.
His entire behavior online, on television, that's not how an innocent person behaves and talks.
That's exactly right, it's like you come home from being out and your wife is like, hey, how was work today? And you'd be like, oh, it was good. I didn't cheat on you or anything.
Sure.
That's the equivalent of what Trump does constantly, and he constantly says things like, well, this is legal, well, it's not illegal, and when you think about it, that's not how most of us function in life.
No.
Right? And so the fact that he's approaching Manafort in this way, how soon can I pardon him? He's acting the way a guilty person does who's trying to keep more shit from coming out about him.
You think he's going to pardon him?
I think it's only a question of when. I think it's an inevitability, and I say that because this man, Donald Trump, is so pathologically incapable of keeping his id in check that he's as predictable as my 3-year-old.
Right.
Where if I say, hey, here's some candy, I'm going to leave it here and I'm going to leave the room. Don't touch it. I know for a fact he will touch it.
Well, and also, too, on top of that, the thing that continuously galls me about the people who constantly come to the president's defense is that they attribute this sort of ethereal, otherworldly intelligence, like, oh, he's so smart, he's playing chess while everybody's checkers. Yeah, all that other crap. But really, I mean, if he was half as intelligent as these people would claim that he would be, then why is he telegraphing in such a dunderheaded way? I mean, he's employed a lawyer who trips over himself, makes Joe Biden look like a Olympic gymnast with how many gaffes that this guy has had. And I just don't understand how people who actively support this president can continuously say that they are constantly amazed by his tactical brilliance in trying to skirt off the special counsel investigation, when that's clearly not the case. It's just, even from the most forgiving perspective about whether or not this president is innocent of everything, which I certainly don't believe that he is, you have to, I would hate to be a lawyer for this president, only because every single time the 3 a.m. rolls around every day, you have to be on the phone staring at his Twitter feed just to wonder what you're going to have to do damage control for next.
I think about people in his administration, Chris, that truly stay. I don't know this for a fact. I assume this because there are some serious people that are seasoned, that are smart, that have a love of country. There are, right? And I believe that they are there. They want to leave. He's so deplorable that they just want to go. Mm-hmm. But he's so deplorable, they have to stay to keep a check on him. And I try to put myself in their shoes. I'm like, what hell that must be. It's like, I can't for another day stand shoulder to shoulder with this son of a bitch. But if I walk away, who's replacing me? And what is he going to do next? And I believe there's people in his administration that are like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are. I mean,
General Mattis, for instance, I bet is probably like that. Maybe even Kelly to an extent.
You have to assume that at least some semblance of the people that are actually employed in the West Wing have a commitment to service for their country, and that's why they are serving. I mean, honestly, if the president of the United States, regardless of who it was, called either of you to service, what would you say?
Well, with him,
I would not serve this president.
I couldn't do it either.
I would have to consider it, honestly. I mean, I despise this man, and it's not like he's going to come calling for me anyway. But
yeah, I don't think a Muslim.
That's a good question, by the way.
Because you have to look at, or at least I have to look at, well, what is it that I might be able to bring to I guess restore some dignity to the White House? Would there be something? Like if I was actually a mover and shaker in Washington who actually had a chance of being called up by the president and I wasn't necessarily a supporter of his, my instinct is to say, no, I shouldn't go. But I would have to think about it, because if you really, anybody who is called to service and they have a spirit of wanting to contribute, that is not exclusive to a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal or a conservative, you know?
It's not. And I'm certainly not suggesting that people that have served in previous administrations were pro that particular president. We know that's surely not the case.
Oh, sure.
I think there's a huge difference in having some fundamental disagreements with Barack Obama or George Bush and a man that I think literally sells us out. And when you stand on the world stage next to Putin and you undermine your own government, your own intelligence agencies, and you do so to embolden and empower a brutal dictator, it's not treasonous in the technical sense and the legal sense, but it is certainly un-American, and it is certainly something that was I think that day, and I think Charlottesville are his two worst days.
Oh my God.
By far. And I'm not sure which one is worse, because in one sense, he's saying that on this side of people that marched with Nazis, white supremacists that killed a young protester, a young girl, were somehow equivalent to people that were there protesting said Nazis. And this whole Antifa bullshit angle to somehow try to make this equivalency, it's all nonsense. But to stand on the world stage and undermine the United States the way he did, I don't know. Those are two rather atrocious moments, and I think some of the darkest hours of an American president, at least in my lifetime. But real fast, because we can go on all day about this and about him, and I certainly want to come back to stuff, but to kind of at least come full circle with this Paul Manafort stuff, and we'll talk more specifically about Michael Cohen. Chris, let me ask you a question. I don't know if there's any sort of constitutional or legal ramifications of Trump actually pardoning Manafort. As I understand it, either one of you jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's anything that really states when a president can do it and how and why. There has certainly been a history and an understanding that, hey, these are people that have obviously been convicted, have served time, and their purpose is, hey, I think this individual has served enough time for what they did. I'm going to get them out of prison, right? But I don't know, have we ever seen an American president use the power of the pardon as a political tool? I mean, that's all this whole thing was with what's his name? I'm going blank. The author that makes all these shitty documentaries. D'Souza. Yes, thank you. 2016 and Hillary's America or whatever. And then racist Sheriff Joe. And now, if he goes after Paul Manafort specifically, right, that what are the repercussions of that? Can anything be done? Or is that just, you got to shrug your shoulders and say, hey, it sucks, but he can do it? What do you think, Chris?
From what I understand, the pardon power is only kind of stifled if a state brings charges against these accused. If it's the United States, it's actually bringing charges. That's what the president has power over in terms of his pardoning ability. So if New York State actually decided to prosecute Manafort, or some of the specific localities decided to bring charges against him, then he would be able to, or the pardon couldn't be applied in that sense. But as far as other things, there's a significant amount of latitude when it comes to the president's pardoning power. But see, that this is the craziness of the times in which we live, just because I really do question how the implications of the president using his pardoning power on someone like Manafort, how would that manifest in independents who are actually thinking of who to vote for in the next presidential election? Would they care? And I don't know if they would, unfortunately. I hope that they would, and I hope that whoever the Democratic nominee is would make the case for why that's such an egregious miscarriage of justice. But after 2016, I honestly don't know what the landscape is going to look like in a couple of years. It's hard to say right now, just because we're less than 3 months away from the midterm elections this time, and it's going to be our first real look at how quote-unquote awake the electorate is in responding to this president and the policies that he's pushing forward, and how Congress has been kind of complicit in allowing him to run roughshod over these domestic and international institutions. So It's hard to say right now for me. I think the midterms are going to be a huge indicator as to what is going to be politically palatable over the next couple of years.
Zaki, are the Democrats going to take back the House?
I don't know. I hope so. Certainly history would point in that direction, but I mean, everything is unprecedented until it's precedented, So it sure looks that way. It looks like momentum and enthusiasm is on the Democrat side, but we'll see.
I hope so. There's this whole thing about a blue wave coming and everything, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard because one thing 2016 has taught me, and I know this sounds really super cynical, but I can't help it, guys, is that I have lost faith in my fellow voter. All right?
Well, but Rick, I mean, you have to look at the micro a bit. I mean, when you look at the fact that Pennsylvania, Trump won it by like a percentage point. You have to look at the fact that ultimately this decision came down to a couple 100,000 votes across the country.
It did, but it's still far too many people that voted for a guy that wanted to ban Muslims, that said POWs weren't war heroes, that's morally bankrupt. It's hard. And when I say I don't mean to be cynical, I mean, that's obviously a very cynical statement, but I just don't want to put my faith in my fellow voter. I'm just going to hope for the best. And sometimes we benefit from their decisions. Sometimes we don't.
Well, let me say something about faith, because I feel like I'm a professional.
Very underrated George Michael record. Actually,
is it underrated?
Actually, it's not even underrated. It just I saw a window there for George Michael reference, and it wasn't even a good one. I screwed it up.
No. But when it comes to faith, I mean, I'm a very, very strong believer in the institutions of our democracy. And although 2016 was a huge wake-up call as far as exactly how fragile those institutions can become, and how it seems like latent fascistic tendencies can arise in some of the seedier parts of the citizenry, there's one thing that I think can be said with relative certainty. This is a trial by fire for the institutions of democracy, and specifically American representative democracy. And the 2016 election was also the product of an unprecedented misinformation campaign by at least 2 belligerent states. I mean, we all know about Russia, but then there's this the relatively recent news item about Iran circulating fake news, social media postings and accounts. And that's also very troubling. But
and you know what that's all about, right? I mean, there's going to be hell to pay for us dropping out of this Iran nuclear deal. I mean, there just is, and that's probably the first step in all this.
I guess what I'm basically trying to say is that we will weather this attack, and the institutions will become stronger for it. I have to believe that. And there are people who are starting to sort of wake up and pay attention to sort of the weaknesses that have presented themselves because of what happened in 2016. I don't know for sure if it's going to turn around by 2020. I don't even know for sure if things are going to be immunized from this kind of attack in a couple of months when we have the midterms. But I have to believe, because of my faith in American democracy, that the institution will have to become stronger as a result of this. And that's what I ultimately put my faith in, because yes, the result that we endured in 2016, not great by a lot of standards, but there were a lot of thumbs on the scale this time. And I take a little bit of solace in that, if that makes sense.
There is, but midterms are always problematic for liberals, progressives, Democrats. They don't get out and vote. Historically, we're talking about history here. So I'm not optimistic.
No, but Rick, I mean, come on. I mean, in 2006, it was, a pretty definitive thumping for President Bush. In fact, he called it a thumping.
Well, that was in the middle. That was in the middle of the Iraq War. I think people had a little bit more of a response to that than maybe they do.
Well, okay,
porn star payoffs.
I think you're underestimating how fired up the liberal base is.
Yeah, so
I hope so. I hope so.
Be my
I'd love to be wrong about this
because I was a senior in high school when the 2006 midterms rolled around. I was not yet 18, so I could not yet vote in them. But if you guys had to take the temperature of how fired up Democrats are or progressives are right now, and you compare that to how fired up they were going into the 2006 midterms, how comparable is it?
It's hard to say because social media didn't play a factor in it back then as it does now. I don't know. In terms of just kind of getting the pulse of the people. It's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how to answer that. Zaki, do you have a better answer than my mumbling here?
I mean, I would say that if you're looking at the enthusiasm to vote on the left, it's substantial. I mean, it is at least comparable to what we saw happen in 2006, excuse me. So I'm optimistic that the Democratic base will show up. And I read an article the other day, which is kind of interesting, about how Republican consultants are concerned because Trump's fake news message has taken root a little too well among his base. And he's out there being like, there's going to be a red wave. It's going to be a red wave. The polls, don't believe the polls. And that's the stuff that the Republican voters are like, yeah, everything's fine.
Oh, it's going to be Karl Rove in 2012 all over again.
Yeah, right. Like, check the math again. Check it again. Yeah.
That was one of my favorite moments in American political history, dude. Watching him crumble on national TV when Obama was reelected. It was so awesome.
But yeah, so I think there's a lot of factors. I think that we tend to speak of Trump's base in over enthusiastic terms. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that he is a 35% president. I at this point I'm past caring about the malaise that prompted them to vote for Trump or whatever, because they're still sticking with him no matter what. They are the very definition of a lost cause. But as I said before, this was an election that was decided by a couple 100,000 votes. That means that there's a lot of people, and a lot of those votes were late breaking. That means that there's a lot of very persuadable people. There's a lot of people who took a chance. They said, what the hell? And I disagree with them doing that, but if they've had sort of a come to Jesus moment, I don't mind that. I think there's a lot of people who have had a come to Jesus moment. A lot of people who see the value of divided government.
Mm-hmm. I certainly hope so. And let's just go on the record now to say you have a lot more faith in people than I do at this very moment. And I hope that I'm wrong. I'm not saying that that Democrats aren't going to take back the House. I'm not saying there's going to be a lot of seats that are won. Just as far as a blue wave, look, if we take back the House, that's great. We can hold him accountable. We have subpoena power. I'm all for that. And then we can get into a whole other conversation about what they should do with the speakership, if that should go to Pelosi or someone else. That's like another podcast in itself. But I want to come back real fast to Cohen to wrap up this portion of the podcast. So a lot of things have also happened in the last 10 hours. The gentleman, I'll use that term loosely, I can't even say his name without the third grader in me laughing, Mr. Pecker, right? Yeah, from the National Enquirer. Now it looks like he's cooperating with Bob. I mean, this is literally it is. This is a reality TV show. I mean, it's a soap opera.
It really is.
So when we have Mr. Pecker from the National Enquirer, now he is cooperating with Bob Mueller.
Well, you can
about
believe
the President of the
Mr.
United States paying off porn stars and conspiring to undermine a presidential election. It's just, you can't write this shit. It's insane. So I don't know what that's all about. Any comments on that? I mean, I guess that's good news that he's cooperating. Obviously, he knows a lot of stuff in terms of how the payments were set up and why. Because really, to prove conspiracy, we have to prove that Trump knew that. I mean, he knew what he was doing, right? He knew that he was undermining an election.
We all know he knew. Like this is what I was saying
right.
earlier.
Like, from a legal standpoint, though, it
drives me crazy.
I'm just talking about from a legal standpoint. I don't know if it can be. It needs to be proven that he knew that he was what he was doing.
But Rick, look how easily. Well, I mean, look how relatively easily these people are breaking.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like that's. I mean, it's astounding, right? Because his whole thing is loyalty. He prizes loyalty above anything else, which is a total mob boss maneuver. But loyalty demanded without loyalty given. Well, this is what happens, you know. It reminds me of, you know, when Cohen turned on him, you know, it reminded me of what the Joker says in The Dark Knight, you know. Batman has no jurisdiction. He'll find him and make him squeal. I know the squealers when I see them. That's Michael Cohen.
Says who?
Yeah. Yeah, that is Michael Cohen. That's a very good analogy. I'm not going to be able to ever get that vision out of my head. So I think there's more of a threat to his presidency with Cohen than there probably is Bob Mueller, but we'll see. We'll see how this unfolds, because it is. Look, guys, I mean, we're getting so numb to so much of this stuff, right? There's so much unsavory just shit happening all the time. Things he says, you can't even keep up with it. I mean, my God, we don't even talk about the fact that he's undermining, again, Jeff Sessions today. Yeah. And his whole thing is, well, I only gave him a job because he was loyal to me. I only gave Omarosa a job because she was loyal. It's like this whole thing about him hiring the best people and being incompetent. It sounds like he gives high-profile jobs to just anybody that sucks his ass. Yep. I mean, is that a leader? That's not a leader.
No, of course not.
That's ridiculous.
I was a little bit heartened, and granted, I'm not usually heartened by anything Jeff Sessions says or does, but I was a little bit heartened to see that he actually started to stand up for his Justice Department a little bit in the face of that scrutiny. I mean, it was not a strong statement of condemnation that came from him, far from it. But this is the thing that continually galls me about the state of conservatives in modern politics, is that 10 years ago, you know, they were the law and order side of things. You know, you trust the institutions of law enforcement to keep us safe. You know, you lean on the Department of Homeland Security to keep us safe from terrorists. And now you have the President of the United States who is openly challenging not just the authority, but the legitimacy of federal law enforcement agencies. And you have his supporters that are parroting those things too. Like, you can't trust anything about what the FBI does. And it's like, well, the conservative talking point for most of the time that I was in college, we had it was a conservative strategist come to speak to one of my senior seminars when I was in college. And the line that she constantly went back to was, "This is a nation of laws."
Well, and that's bullshit now, we know that.
Exactly. It's just like, I'm surprised that that's the thing that modern Republicans seem to have gone back on by and large. Obviously there are exceptions, and Republicans who have been consistent in what their ideals and beliefs tell them, but the larger party line, especially when it comes to media representation of the president's supporters and the most diehard supporters who are actually going to his rallies, are that you cannot trust the authorities to actually even-handedly enforce the law. It's just mind-boggling to me.
It's you know what? Right now, we're almost 2 years in this presidency. I think mind-boggling is the phrase of the day.
Yeah.
It's the phrase. Everything to me right now is mind-boggling, and when it's not mind-boggling, I'm mind-boggled that I'm not mind-boggled. I'm like, why is this not shocking? It's shocking to me that it should be shocking, and it's not.
Well, and you have to admire too the people who actually are on the front lines that are pushing for some semblance of actual political change. I mean, I worked in a couple of local campaigns back in Washington State, and I know the legwork that can go into just getting a single vote for a state house seat, right? But the things that are happening right now, I just wouldn't have the energy for it. The energy that these current political operatives can find to actually try and push back against the line of this White House is genuinely astonishing to me. And I live now, I mean, I lived before in a blue state, and I live now in a blue state. So maybe if I decided to drive up to Wisconsin, I feel like I could make more of a difference if I decided to knock on doors up there. But it's just astonishing to me how people can still have the energy, I guess, to still be outraged when, like you said before, Rick, it's very easy to become numb to all of this.
Well, especially when the goalposts keep getting moved as well. It wasn't collusion. Okay, it was collusion, but collusion's not illegal. I didn't pay off the porn star. Okay, I did, but it wasn't through campaign funds. It was through my own money. I mean, it's constantly this stuff. Like, you're going, I mean, you guys are tying yourself up in pretzels trying to defend him and him trying to defend his his actions. It's mind-boggling. All right, so we could talk about this all day long. I guess just a quick prediction here. Zaki, is Trump going to get through this first term?
Oh man, that's the question. I'll say that I feel like the odds of that happening lessened this week. So in other words, if you would have asked me this a week ago, I would have said, yeah, probably. I think it's gotten a lot more challenging. I think there's still some factors that are in play, and foremost among them is what happens in the midterms. If the Democrats do not take back at least one house in the midterms, then we're deeply effed.
I 100% agree with that.
I mean, we heard it today. Grassley and Lindsey Graham have said, yeah, he can fire Sessions after the midterms.
That's a 180.
It is, and it's so utterly unsurprising. And it's funny because we're talking about how Trump surrounds himself with sycophants. I remember when President Obama offered Chuck Grassley a cabinet position.
Yeah,
that's the kind of man President Obama was.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because he wanted people from across the ideological spectrum to be.
He wanted a team of rivals.
Exactly. And Grassley, for purely partisan, cynical calculation, turned it down. So you talk about when the president calls, you answer. What a bunch of horse shit.
It's a bunch of horseshit. I mean, Obama even went as far. He had the ACA in his palm of his hands because he had both. I mean, he controlled all three chambers of government, and he still made a lot of concessions to Republicans that didn't vote it on it anyway, which ultimately ended up hurting it, giving governors the power the way he did because that's the way he rolled. And then, he increasingly, at a certain point, just started having doing executive orders because after 2010, there was no way he could even govern without it.
Well, he overestimated the goodwill and the willingness of Republicans to actually come to the table.
He did.
Which, I mean, for a president to have a flaw like that, I would almost prefer that a president have a flaw like that than not to have it. But yeah, I mean, he was willing to work, and they just wanted to pound away every single thing that he tried to come to the middle for.
He was the hope and change president. He ultimately just became the hope and hope president. I mean, really. So, all right, I'm going to shift gears here, guys. Last question for the show. It's a little bit of a philosophical can of worms we're going to open up here, but I want to get you guys' response. Zaki, we're going to start with you. Last week, Governor Cuomo of New York got into a little bit of trouble, particularly with the right-wing base. And his Trump and his army of fake patriots seized on this for political purposes, painting the governor as anti-American and whatnot. But it did strike some serious debates online, many of which I was a part of. So I want to ask you, Zaki, if you guys aren't familiar with this, Governor Cuomo made a comment that America is not great. It's never been great. And there's more to that statement, but that obviously is the headline. But I want to ask just a really simple question. Zaki, I want to start with you. Is America great?
There are aspects of America that are great, and there are aspects of America that are deeply problematic. The problems don't negate the greatness, and the greatness doesn't negate the problems. I think only someone with nationalistic blinders on says that America is, in its totality, a beacon of greatness. That's fully acknowledging that we've done a lot right. But I reflexively blanch when we sort of speak in hushed tones as if America is this untouchable beacon of greatness, and unfortunately we only see that in political terms, right? Because you're not allowed to toe anything, whether Democrat or Republican. You're not allowed to toe anything but the American exceptionalism party line,
right?
And that's just, I mean, it's silly because we have in our history many problems. Many of those problems have not yet been resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I say this as somebody who loves this country. I love this country, but yeah, we got some shit to do. We got a lot of stuff that needs fixing. I don't know if that answers.
No, it does. It's a loaded question. There's not a right or wrong answer to it. It's all just sort of how we define what that means. What is great and what is greatness. And for me, very similar to what you said, I love this country and there's a lot of great things about it. Are we a great country? Well, can you be a great country and be a far from perfect country? If that's the case, then sure, yeah, we're great, but we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in how we treat our fellow Americans. I don't mean to say that in like some generic trite fashion. I'm talking about we still have a lot of issues with race. We have a lot of issues with sexism. We have a lot of issues with bigotry. We have issues with xenophobia. We've got a lot of problems, and they're not going away. And I don't close my eyes and just rah rah, red, white, and blue. I love my country, and pretend like everything is hunky dory. It's not. There was a school bus killed overseas in Syria just last week. There was a United States bomb that did that, and I guarantee you, those individuals, the family members of those precious children that are dead, aren't saying, well, it's the inherent greatness of America, and this is just this is the price to pay for war and for red, white, and blue patriotism. No, we're fueling more hatred around the world every time we do something like that. And I'm not just blaming Trump. Obama and every president has done that. We have an issue with bombings. We have an issue with mass shootings. We have an issue, like I said, with race. We have a lot of issues, and I don't want to get complacent and just say everything is great and we're a great country when we've done a lot of really bad things, and we have a lot of problems. But we can still love our country. It's like a relationship, right? I love. I don't know if I say my wife is a good example of this because I could get in trouble here.
Tread lightly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But any relationship, it's never perfect. And you always want that person that you love to be better, to bring themselves up, to be better than they are. And you know that they can be. And that's how I feel about the country.
I will say this though, Rick, and sorry, Chris, I want you to jump into, but I think that Cuomo could not have been any more club-footed with how he said what he said, because he was stumbling all over himself. He tripped forward and landed with his foot in his mouth, because he just wrote the Oppo headlines for the folks who are campaigning against him.
He did, and obviously he went on to talk about how we need to do better with women and everything, and racism, and basically the things we're saying now. But you're right; it was certainly a you didn't build that moment, or what difference does it make anyway moment where the context was sound. I mean, not the context, the intention was, but it just you fuck it all up when you say something stupid like that, and then you fuel this phony patriotism that Trump has weaponized. He does it all the time. He did it with the NFL. He continues to do it, and it's all bullshit. We know that
did you see, by the way, Beto O'Rourke talking about those NFL protests?
Yes.
I thought that was just amazing.
Right.
And obviously I live in Dallas, but I was in Austin a couple weeks ago at my uncle's, and I went through a walk in his neighborhood, and I thought it was going to be more of a conservative neighborhood. Austin's a pretty liberal town, but there were Better Work like signs everywhere, like all over the place. And I was just like, I know it's anecdotal and he's 4 or 5 points behind and it's going to be a tough hill for him. But my fellow Texans, you have to vote. Don't think that we can't win it. We can't if you don't vote. If you don't think that we can, you have to vote. That's not just for Better Work. That's for anybody, whether I don't care who it is. You got to get out and vote. I'm hoping a turning point in this, because that speech alone was more American and more passionate than anything Cruz has ever done in his professional life and probably his personal life as well. Chris Clow, is America great?
Yes, because there's a difference, as you alluded to earlier, between great and perfect. Great, the definition of great is to be of an extent, amount, or intensity above the normal or average, or considerably above the normal or average. And by that metric, do I personally consider America great? Yes. But that doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge the serious problems that kind of eat at a cancer on American society. There is... I would challenge any MAGA hat wearing person, because I don't even call them conservatives anymore. But I would challenge any MAGA hat wearing supporters of the president that I believe more inherently in American greatness than they do. And I think by my standard, you guys probably would too, just because we are far more likely to love everything that America is supposed to stand for in spite of all of its flaws. And we take it as it is, not necessarily how we want it to be, but we're always pushing it towards where we want it to be. We're pushing it towards greater acceptance for minorities. We're pushing it towards a universal belief in human rights, equal protection under the law. These are the kinds of ideals, because really at the end of the day, in the United States of America, you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt yourself or somebody else. Like, that's the most basic way to live in a society. And it applies to entities, it applies to companies. Well, companies doing what it needs to do, yeah, but if it's trying to take advantage of laws that hurt someone else, then it obviously needs to be regulated. And those kinds of things apply too. But nothing galls me more than when I see someone who just assumes that because I'm not a supporter of this president by any stretch of the imagination, and because I'm not wearing American flag shorts and like a cut-up t-shirt with an eagle on it, that I somehow believe less in the ideals and the institutions of this country. I would never wear the flag because I revere the flag far too much. So when I see people of a specific ideological stripe basically try to take ownership over a symbol that's supposed to be universal to every American, it seriously bothers me.
When they make it about party, when they say we own patriotism, it's ours. You're not a patriot. We own it.
I was volunteering for the local Democratic Party in Whatcom County, Washington, where I lived before I came to Chicago, and I was at the county fair, and it must have been summer of 2010 or maybe 2011, and the Tea Party actually had their own booth set up. The Republicans had a booth, the Democrats had a booth, and the Tea Party had a booth, and the Tea Party booth was giving out signs. And all they were, literally, it had the American flag printed on it, and underneath the first three words of the preamble to the Constitution, "We the people." And that was supposed to be their symbol. And nothing offended me more than seeing this relatively fringe ideological right-wing group trying to take ownership of that and say that, well, this is clearly what we stand for. They don't. That's where polarization comes from. If you try to co-opt the symbols of this country and try and have some sort of exclusive license to the idea that America needs to return to some form of greatness that is emblematic of the Deep South in the 1960s, then there's a serious problem of amenability in discourse. And you don't get to this sort of larger goal that I think everybody has now of less intense tribalism by saying that the symbol that's supposed to fly above all of us, wherever we go in this country, is somehow exclusively the property of one ideological side. That's just, and it's antithetical to being an American.
And if you listen to Better Works' speech on, just Google it, about his response to the NFL kneeling, you guys are like on the same wavelength. Like what you just said was so beautiful and perfect, and it's very similar to what he said in response to that specific thing. And I would encourage everybody to listen to that, and thank you for those comments, because that was pretty fantastic. On a little bit of levity here, I would like to go on over to the Tea Party guys and said, hey, just a random question here, since you guys are all about like spending and everything. Can you show me one rally you guys were at in 2008 when Bush was spending like a bat out of hell? And by the way, I'm also just curious, since this current president is spending more since 2008 and the debt is just rising, where are your rallies now? What is different about George Bush and Trump and Barack Hussein Obama? It escapes me. A little
See, if I had a time machine, I would pluck you in front of them to say that, and also just add to that. By the way, I'm from Texas.
By the way, MF,
Boom.
I'm from Texas. Anyway, well, guys, this was a great conversation. You know, Zaki, do you have any just last words you want to say on this before we do some plugs here?
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing me on, and I think these conversations are necessary, and I think I'm glad you ended this chat the way you did, where we are talking about how much we love this country, because I think that unfortunately gets drowned out in the media noise, and I miss the days when partisan disagreements didn't mean that one person loves this country and the other person hates this country, and I feel like I don't know when that went away, but I would love to have that back.
Yeah, I'll say it again. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but let's stop weaponizing patriotism. I'm talking to you, Trump. I'm talking to you, Fox News. And if there's liberals and progressives out there doing it, stop. Just stop. You know, Joe Walsh was a guy that was a Tea Party guy, in fact, that I've never been a fan of. But you guys know who he is? Yeah. But he put out a beautiful tweet the other day. I almost wish I had it in front of me, but I don't care. I'll just paraphrase it. Everybody can look it up. You should. And he was talking about quit calling people that disagree with us politically the enemy of my country. My liberal friends and family love this country as much as I do. And we just see things a little differently. And I just thought that was awesome. And we need more of that. And I appreciate this conversation very much, guys. These are important chats, and we need more of them. And I also want to say it's very cathartic for me because I have some cynicism in me that I don't normally have just as a person. And right now it's hard. It's so hard because this presidency is taking a toll on me. His supporters are taking a toll on me, but I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up on this country, and I'm not going to give up on my fellow man, even though voters have disappointed me. And when you rely on people in masses to do the right thing, you might set yourself up for disappointment anyway, because, what's that great line in Men in Black with, he's like, no.
I was
like, no, I'm going to paraphrase it. So jump in like, no, people are great. Like a person is great. People are erratic and dangerous and whatever, Tommy Lee Jones says that to Will Smith. That's a great line. But
what he says after it is equally important, right? Where he says our ability to adapt to change, right? 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. 15 minutes ago, you knew that humans were alone on this planet. Imagine.
That's a great line. I forgot about that. And 5 minutes ago, you didn't know that aliens exist. Oh, that's a great line. Well, I'd say we have to end it there, right? I mean, and we're pop culture buddies too, so like we'll end it on a Men in Black reference. So let's do some plugs here. Mr. Chris Clow, go ahead and give us a plug, sir.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Clow, ChrisClow. And the next big thing that I have, I write a column at movies.com every week called Comics on Film that examines exactly that, comic book characters on film. But I also have a podcast called Comics on Consoles that is putting out a new episode on September 6th or 7th. It deals with comic book video games, and I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man because there's a PS4 Spider-Man game coming out on September 7th that a lot of comic book gamers are really looking forward to. Other than that, I'm actually on a podcast with Zaki Hasan, like we talked about before. Discovery Debrief, a Star Trek podcast. We're in the middle of getting ready to plan out a new episode where we talk about Zaki's all-time favorite Star Trek episode. So that'll be a lot of fun.
That's going to be a big deal.
Okay. Thank you very much, Zaki.
I hope.
And Zaki, you got one plug already there. You have something else you want to say?
I know, it's like a plug and a half. Well, I host the Movie Film Podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks, and it's me and my partner Brian Hall talking about all the latest news and reviews out of Hollywood. We also do movie commentary tracks every month. Our latest commentary track just came out last week, and I would love for you to check it out. It's us talking through The Fugitive in celebration of its 25th anniversary. It's a personal all-time favorite for me as well as for him, and we are both Chicagoans, so we had a lot of fun talking through that movie. Also, the Nostalgia Theater podcast, which I host, the upcoming episode of that features my chat with author Mark O'Connell about the new book Watching Skies, Star Wars, Spielberg, and Us. And it's just geeking out for 1 hour about all these great 80s sci-fi movies that shaped not only us, but an entire generation.
I'm a huge fan of both of you guys, by the way. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm a part of Batman on Film. I'm not going to really give a plug per se because it's kind of my show here, but And that's how I met both of you. And it's an honor to have you guys both in this political discussion, because it was a really good one. And I appreciate it very much. If you guys want to follow me personally on Twitter at Shewrick, SHEWRICK, at Left Shew Politic, to find all the shenanigans that myself and Michael and Jeremy are up to. And again, they will both be doing their own show here pretty soon, so keep an eye for that. And also just want to give a shout out to Jeremy, who recently got married, and we were all together in Malibu, California just a couple weeks ago. And congratulations, buddy, and your bride is beautiful and brilliant. So anyway, guys, again, Rick Shew with Left Shew Politics, and now it's time for announcer Rachel to take us out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of our Left Shew Politics podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Left Shew Politics. Follow the Facebook page at facebook.com/Left Shew Politics and the LSP website, leftshewpolitics.com. Search for our channel on YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play.